The local pulp and paper mill put up for sale. The Northwood Roundabout studied for improvements. And the TBSO plays at Westgate High School. Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Riley McManus. The Thunder Bay Pulp and Paper Mill is looking for a new owner after Resolute Forest Products and Paper Excellence announced plans today to sell it. The move has left many unknowns, including whether there are any potential buyers interested in the facility. Vasilios Bellos reports.
The announced plans to sell off the Thunder Bay Pulp and Paper Mill caught many off guard, including the head of the union representing the majority of the 430 workers at the facility.
They were going to pump over $100 million into our facility in the next year or so, right? So what's going on with that? You know, and that's a concern, right? So I was quite surprised, right, this morning when we got the news.
This announcement comes a few months after Paper Excellence agreed to buy Resolute Forest Products and its 40 mills worldwide. The intentions to sell the local plant will be contingent on Paper Excellence and the new affiliate closing their acquisition of Resolute, expected in the first half of 2023. Bragnello says these ownership changes have happened numerous times with the local mill, but he recognizes there's always uncertainties.
We have a younger workforce who probably haven't seen this before, right, where we were used to it, but there's always that doubt when they put something for sale, okay, what's going to happen, right? And we thought, you know, with Paper Excellence coming in, we're going to spend all this money, and then they sell you to basically keep this process going so they'll be successful in doing that Resolute, right?
Some interested parties are expected to tour the mill in the coming weeks and months. Resolute Vice President Seth Kurzman could not indicate whether any potential buyers were currently in place, but says deciding to sell was not easy.
Let us be very, very clear. The Thunder Bay Pulp and Paper Mill is an exceptional asset. This is not an easy decision. It's a very difficult decision. Launching a sale process is an extremely hard thing to do. We believe it's necessary, but that does not make it any easier.
Mayor-elect Ken Boshkov was initially concerned when he heard the news of the sale, but he says the excess wood chips produced at 3 area sawmills, which help feed the pulp and paper mill, will help make the operation appealing to a new buyer.
Clearly, the government has ensured that the chips have to be used, certain percentages. So that gives me a bit of optimism that the plant will keep going to keep the recycling of the chips as a fuel source and use in the process.
Vasilios Bellos, TBT News.
A joint venture between Asinica Mining and 3 First Nation communities in the region was made official today, allowing for a collaboration between the groups on a new lithium mining project. The agreement means a lot to the president of the Sudbury-based company because of his personal connection to one of the First Nations involved.
So I'm pretty excited for that to happen because I am a member of the Red Rock Indian Band. So knowing that there's a lot of new development coming to the north is exciting, and we can bring our type of work from Sudbury to the north.
The other 2 First Nations to sign the agreement, along with Red Rock Indian Band, include Rocky Bay First Nation and Sandpoint First Nation. There was excitement during the signing of the agreement, including from Red Rock Chief Marcus Hardy, who sees this as an important step to ensuring First Nations are at the table.
Whether it be construction logistics, whether it be any development with the Ontario government or Canadian government itself, we've always kind of been on the back burner or just a check in the box. Now we're a proponent and we're able to do business.
The benefits and jobs and training for jobs and revenue sharing and it's a win-win.
The mining site east of Lake Nipigon is expected to be developed in the second quarter of 2023. Disappointment, but also optimism. It's a mixed reaction from the Anishinaabe Aski Nation following this week's ruling that rejected part of a settlement agreement that would have seen $20 billion going to First Nations children and families who were discriminated against by Canada's child welfare system. Lee Noonan has more.
The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal rejected half of a $40 billion settlement agreement on the grounds that it excluded some categories of victim. That portion of the settlement was intended to compensate each First Nations child who was placed in state care and the families they were removed from under a child welfare system that was ruled to be willfully and recklessly discriminatory. This ruling is just the latest in a case that was first filed 15 years ago, and NAN Deputy Grand Chief Bobby Narcisse says he's disappointed that the wait for compensation will continue.
It's going to delay the much-needed compensation that is owed to our children, to many of our children that were in care across Anishinaabe Nation.
However, Narcisse also says he's encouraged by the possibility of improving the settlement by expanding eligibility and increasing compensation amounts.
It just means that we're going to have to go back to the table and look at ways to ensure that this compensation package is rolled out in such a way that is responsible.
Indigenous Services Minister Patty Haidu echoed those sentiments, calling the decision disappointing, but also saying she's confident they will get to a solution that works.
The next steps are, really reviewing what the tribunal has said, trying to get at that, what the tribunal feels is a missing aspect to the settlement, and trying to strengthen the settlement to ensure that we meet the terms of the tribunal.
Haidu wouldn't give an estimate for how long the renewed negotiations might take, as they're still awaiting the tribunal's full decision and analysis, but she does say they will be refining the agreement rather than going back to the drawing board entirely. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
A study of the roundabout in Northwood began today to try to make it more accessible to everyone. The Civil Engineering Department at Lakehead University will be working with the city and the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. Jess Clement has the details.
Researchers with the Civil Engineering Department at LU conducted an experiment at the Edward and Redwood Roundabout to evaluate if the current safety measures in place make the crosswalks accessible for everyone. The department previously contacted the CNIB to gauge the roundabout's accessibility for pedestrians with vision loss. The resulting feedback led to researchers testing out temporary rumble strips, which city crews installed on the approaches and within the roundabout. The temporary rumble strips provided pedestrians an audible warning of oncoming vehicles. Associate Professor Juan Pernia notes one of the issues they've come across is drivers not stopping for pedestrians.
People with vision loss is harder because in a regular intersection, they can tell if vehicles are stopping and what direction. In this one, is a continuous movement. So in reality, you cannot figure out if they're coming to your direction or not. So if the people are not stopping or trying to help the pedestrians, it's a whole challenge for all the people with vision loss. So it's not safe at all.
Presently, there are flashing lights and sounds for those crossing Edward Street east and west, but nothing for those trying to cross north and south on Redwood Avenue. The CNIB's Kiri Butter says it's something to be concerned about, especially since not all drivers stop for pedestrians. She adds it's important to highlight these issues and bring awareness to cities when they're developing roundabouts.
Yes, they're accessible to wheelchairs and other individuals, but when it comes down to people with vision loss, we might need a few extra tools and resources that are in the crosswalks to make them a safe environment so that they are able to, we're at a grocery store, how cross the road to get the groceries, to get the resources, to have the independence to navigate their own space.
Pernia says they hope to use the report as a jumping-off point to widen their investigation to other cities across Canada, where roundabouts are more widely used. Results from the accessibility study is expected to be available early next year. Jessica Clement, TBT News.
A $2.5 million winning ticket for this week's Lotto 649 draw was sold here in Thunder Bay. The Ontario Lottery and Gaming Commission says 2 ticket holders will share the $5 million jackpot, with the other winning ticket being sold in Brampton. The Thunder Bay winner has not yet come forward to claim their big prize. Grade 7 and 8 students from several Lakehead public schools were taken through a classical music journey today, thanks to a performance by the Thunder Bay Symphony Orchestra. The orchestra performed their concert called Musical Time Machine on the cafeteria stage at Westgate Collegiate. The program was meant to take students on a path through the history and evolution of music, starting off with songs composed in the Renaissance era and ending with the composer who lives in Edmonton right now. Guest conductor Cosette Hustov Valdez says having the orchestra at the school is a great way to bring music to an audience whose musical tastes are still being developed.
The future of our audience, our musicians, our, the appreciation for music starts with children, so it's very important, and the youth. Very important to inspire them, to connect with them, and to show them how cool classical music is.
It's wonderful to see partnerships developed in Thunder Bay, and when we teach instrumental music, it's really important to see examples that are professional, that are set for our students. And it's just nice to know they're local, and at one time they were like our students.
The TBSO's next concert is the Halloween Spooktacular this Saturday afternoon at the Community Auditorium. The Haunted Harbor tours on the Alexander Henry Museum ship are wrapping up this week, and organizers are calling it a huge success. The Halloween tours are a fundraiser for Our Kids Count and were completely sold out before the first night on October 13th. The Vintage Icebreaker was chosen as the host site due to its spooky hallways and dark living quarters. The tour also includes some scary stops on the old Brill buses, with ghost hunters on hand to explain what they've discovered on the old ship. The vice president of the Lakehead Transportation Museum Society says, besides helping the charity, this event also provides extra exposure for their attractions at the Pool 6 dock.
Well, it's a real good use for it, and it'll be a good fundraiser. Working with Jackie, and it's amazing how many people come up and they go, we didn't know this was here. So it's good exposure for us.
The Haunted Harbor has been so much fun. We've had every night sold out so far, about 130 people coming through the ship each night, and it's just been so nice to see everybody come out and hearing lots of screams coming from the ship. We have no doubts this is going to come back next year. It's going to come back bigger and better next year for sure. We're hoping to raise about $15,000 from this event this year.
The Haunted Harbor continues tonight and wraps up tomorrow night. But as mentioned, the tours are sold out, so you'll have to wait until next Halloween to check it out. And Fiona, I was so hoping that I was able to get a ticket for that, but it's sold out. Shame. But with Halloween on the mind of some people, and especially the kids, these temperatures aren't too bad.
Yeah, this was actually a pretty, especially this week, a nice week to head out to something like that, although I'm not sure I would personally want to go to an event where you're hearing screams throughout, but I'm a wuss. Today we had an overnight low of -5. It was actually very chilly in some parts of the region, Thunder Bay being one of them. And it didn't move above the freezing mark until about 11 o'clock this morning, but we did warm up to a high of 9, which is right around those seasonal highs, maybe even a couple of degrees above. We had partly to mostly cloudy conditions most of the day, but the winds have been very light from the southeast, 3 to 15 kilometers per hour. To the west, Fort Frances dropped down to a low of -6, but rebounded beautifully up to 13 as their high this afternoon. At this hour, with the clouds basically blotting out the sunshine, they're currently at 11 Celsius. We've got 10 in Atikokan and Dryden, Kenora, 11 in Red Lake and Sioux Lookout. That's under mostly cloudy skies. It cools off a little bit as you head into Pickle Lake and Armstrong and Greenstone, but they also didn't have quite as cool a night as areas to the west did. Temperatures just hovering right around the freezing mark, but at this hour they've got lots of sunshine in Greenstone, a little cooler in Marathon at 4, and Sault Ste. Marie, very similar to Thunder Bay, under mostly cloudy skies. They are currently at 9 Celsius. Now, tonight we are going to stay on the plus side. 3 Celsius is expected to be our low, but it comes with a fair amount of cloud. But fear not, because we have some beautifully warm air that's going to continue to push in from the southwest into northwestern Ontario. And that means starting tomorrow, as this warm-up continues, we are going to hit double-digit highs for much of the region, including Thunder Bay, and it's going to stick around for quite a while, and I'll have more details later on in the news hour.
Thank you so much, Fiona. That is very exciting news. Well, a very important visit today in Ottawa from U.S. Secretary of State. We'll have all those details for you as your Thursday News Hour continues.
A shared view that more likely needs to be done for the National Police in support of them.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Ottawa today to discuss some of the most pressing global conflicts, like continued support for Ukraine. Kevin Gallagher reports.
At a time of global crisis, the United States sent its top diplomat to Canada. It was Secretary of State Antony Blinken's first visit officially north of the border. He spent much of the day meeting with his counterpart, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly, and also spent time with Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland.
It's an honor for Canada that you're here. Thank you.
Now, much of that discussion focused around the war in Ukraine. But there was a lot of attention paid as well to another crisis even closer to home, and that is the unrest in Haiti. Blinken has said that he'd like to perhaps look at putting together an international task force that could go into Haiti and stabilize the country if the request is there. Now, the United States says it does not want to lead it, and today, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly didn't make it clear if Canada would step in, only saying that there has been a Canadian delegation sent to Haiti to observe the conditions on the ground.
we're looking at different options, but we want to make sure that we have the right assessment.
A shared view that more likely needs to be done for the National Police in support of them to allow them to get a real grip on security and to take back these parts of the capital that the gangs have been dominating.
Though the details are thin, Joly did stress that Canada must play a role in helping Haiti find political stability, also insisting that Haitians need to be at the center of that process. Tomorrow, Blinken and Joly will travel to Montreal, where they'll discuss the importance of critical minerals and the future of electric vehicles. Kevin Gallagher, CTV News, Ottawa.
Staying in the national capital, the head of the Ontario Provincial Police testified today at the Emergencies Act inquiry, with the commissioner admitting there was an intelligence report before the occupation that indicated that the protesters had no exit plan. Here's Sean Lethong.
Testifying before the Emergencies Act inquiry, OPP Commissioner Thomas Carrick says before the convoy arrived, police had information that protesters had no exit strategy and there were discussions around a long-term presence in Ottawa.
There was reference to multiple weeks, but also demands that would not be realized and committed protesters that would not be leaving unless those demands were realized.
And by the end of the first weekend, police did not have the resources to handle the protest.
Would it be fair to say that as of the date of this meeting, which is the 31st, the Monday, that the OPS was overwhelmed?
Yes.
That the commissioner raised concerns with then Ottawa Police Chief Peter Slowly.
Concerns were around not having a sufficient plan in place as it was relayed by my team.
The concerns had grown to a loss of confidence by the federal government, as shown in a text conversation where the RCMP commissioner said to the OPP commissioner on February 5th,
"Between you and I only, GOC losing/lost confidence in OPS, we got to get to safe action/enforcement, because if they go to the Emergency Measures Act, you or, supposed to be I assume, you or I may be brought in to lead, not something I want."
When asked if he had lost confidence in Ottawa police,
that's a difficult question to answer as to whether I had confidence in the OPS at the time. I was certainly aware of the challenges that they were experiencing.
Back in Toronto, Premier Ford once again faced questions over his refusal to appear at the inquiry.
Will the Premier stop his court action, apologize to the citizens of Ottawa, and give testimony in front of the inquiry?
He knows it's a federal issue. He knows it's a federal inquiry, and that's up to the federal government.
Former OPP Commissioner Chris Lewis says Ford would have little responsibility in relation to the Ottawa occupation, making his refusal to testify suggest something else.
Is there a real need for the Premier to testify? I don't believe there is. But by not testifying, he's almost suggesting to the public that there's something to hide. And I don't think that's right or fair to anybody. So I think he should testify and move forward, and let's get this behind us.
A new survey indicates people are relying on food banks more than ever. Over 1.5 million visits were recorded in March alone. The stats come from Food Banks Canada. High inflation and low social assistance rates are among the factors being blamed. Janice Golding has the details.
Volunteers are hard at work at the North York Harvest Food Bank, sorting through donations and trying to make sure families who need their help get it, especially given the need has never been greater.
1.5 million people turned to food banks in 1 month alone in 2022. That's a shocking number. And it's shocking not only because it's a big number, but it's a 35% increase since before the pandemic. So more people than ever before in the history of food banks in this country are relying on our support to put food on the table for themselves and their families.
Food Banks Canada has released its annual Hunger Count 2022 report, and it says vulnerable populations are being impacted like never before. More seniors are depending on their help, while 1/3 of food bank users are children, despite the fact they only represent 1/5 of the population.
Well, what we're seeing is the dual pressure of both affordability. We're all seeing that. It costs a lot more to get groceries on the table. Rent is expensive. But it's also showing that we've got a broken social safety net and not enough people are making enough money to go to the grocery store.
Edvin Odeski started using the food bank when he was just 4. His mother, a single parent, had breast cancer.
The whole being sick thing put her out of a job just because of the frequency of like treatments and surgeries and all that type of stuff that she had to go through, and then also full-time care for me.
And he says he will be eternally grateful for the support he and his mom received throughout the years.
There wasn't really a point where we didn't have anything at all to put on the table, but that was probably only thanks to the food bank, to be honest. I don't know how we would have gotten through what we gotten through without it.
The food bank says during the pandemic, many people received income supports. However, those ended in lockstep with inflation, and it's creating unprecedented pressure on food banks.
Speaking of shortages, more and more Canadian nurses are leaving to work south of the border, contributing to a staffing shortage. That is a major factor behind closed emergency rooms and hospital wards here at home. John Woodward reports.
Emily Pike is packing her bags. The Toronto nurse won't be working in Toronto anymore.
I actually just worked as an emergency department nurse for the last year in Toronto, and now I'm going to Florida.
The final straw for her, stressful shifts, caring for as many as 6 patients at a time.
You have to get medication for them, all that, but then you have another patient, they're more mental health, and they're trying to escape the hospital or something, and you're one person. How are you supposed to go and do all of that at once?
A similar story for Damilola Ola Adegun. She's worked in New York and Texas and loves the pay and the work-life balance.
I've never, ever seen that in Ontario, never seen that in Toronto. I was like, yeah, and you want me to come back? There's no way.
A trend that is hollowing out Canada's hospitals. At the same time, the stresses of the pandemic are pushing other nurses to retire. A nurse shortage has been a factor in closed wards and ERs in at least 14 hospitals.
This impacts this access to health care that is critical when we need it, particularly for emergency services.
Not just here, the pandemic caused a worldwide nursing shortage, with countries now competing for nurses like a commodity.
Even the full-time permanent roles are paying a good $15, $20 an hour more than what you'd be making in Canada. And then the sign-on bonuses, $10,000, $20,000, assistance with housing, relocation, are all typically part of the packages.
But it doesn't appear that anyone in Canada is tracking nurse migration. CTV News requested data from the US-based Commission on Graduates of Foreign Nursing Schools. It told us 801 Canadian nurses applied to transfer their credentials to the US in 2018, rising to more than 1,300 the next year. The numbers dropped in the pandemic, but started rising again to almost 1,700 in 2022, with the year not out. The agency says that's more than double just 5 years ago and could be an all-time high.
The pattern that we're seeing is that it is increasing year over year.
Job recruiter Samantha White says she has seen a major increase in the last 2 years since an Ontario law has capped public sector wage increases at 1% annually for 3 years. She says a free trade agreement gives nurses freedom to work in the U.S.
It's a lot more lucrative than it is up here in Canada, especially specifically Ontario, where we're seeing the rates not go up due to Bill 124.
Ontario's government told CTV News in a statement its plan includes 6,000 more healthcare workers, $34 million to increase enrollment in nursing programs, and international recruiting, saying over 1,000 internationally educated nurses have been deployed to hospitals across Ontario to gain the language and practice experience they need to become practicing nurses in Ontario. Measures that don't address a key problem of compensation, says Pike.
A lot of the new grads that are starting are all leaving right away.
The money and working conditions pushing even new grads to head for the door. John Woodward, CTV News, Vancouver.
Turning to the market activity now, let's see how they did today. Here in Canada, the TSX gained 72 points at 19,352. In New York, the Dow jumped 194 points to 32,033.